Welcome to In the Margins. I'm your host, Ralph Newell from Diverse Issues in Higher Education. Today's guest is Dr. Antonio Flores, the CEO and president of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, better known as HACU. At the time of this interview, we are in the middle of the National Hispanic-Serving Institution Week, as proclaimed by the Biden White House. And today is actually the start of Hispanic Heritage Month. So I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Flores.
Thank you, Israel. Look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. I actually officially met Dr. Flores last night for the first time in person at the HACU reception here in DC. You guys were commemorating the 30th anniversary of the HSI designation from Congress, as well as the 30th anniversary of the HNET program, which we'll definitely talk about a little bit later. But you've been, seems like almost part of HACU since its inception last night. You were talking about how long you'd been there, I think 25 years, you said. And right. So this is just the 30th anniversary of the HSI designation. So please tell our audience exactly what that means and what has been the biggest challenge for HACU since that designation has been
Sure, I'll be happy to. Obviously, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of a landmark legislative decision made by Congress in 1992 with the amendments to the Higher Education Act of that year. And it was just a very brief, almost a footnote section under Title III that created the framework for Hispanic-Serving Institutions to be recognized as federally sanctioned and supported institutions for the first time in history. So it only took about 144 years since much of the southwestern part of the U.S., which was part of Mexico, became part of the Union, and to get to the point of the federal government acknowledging the importance of HSIs for the nation. And so that's a big deal for us to celebrate. And from that point on, in 1998, there was a very strong effort to increase the very small amount that was appropriated in fiscal 2005 for the first time of just $12 million, which is not even a drop in the bucket for support of more than 100 HSIs back then. And in 98, that was expanded significantly in terms of the scope of work for HSIs under the Higher Education Act. In 2010, the now Title V legislation, which is an entire title as opposed to a tiny section under Title III, came about. And then amendment to the Higher Education Act that created Title V became, of course, what is today the main source of revenue for HSIs from the federal government. And the amounts have increased significantly over the years, but of course, so has the number of HSIs. Mm-hmm. And now we have 559 that are continually increasing in number from year to year. But the funding remains stagnant and totally inadequate to help those institutions serve the needs of the very diverse and fast-growing population. The student population of HSIs is now about 5.3 million collectively, and they enroll 67% of all the Hispanics in college today, which is more than 3.5, almost 3.8 million now. Mm-hmm. And not only do they enroll the vast majority of Latinos, but they also enroll a very, very important number of African Americans, Asian Americans, and Native Americans, and non-Hispanic whites, among others. So they are really a microcosm of America's diversity. and continue to be way behind when it comes to funding from the federal government. They only get about 68 cents per student annually, compared to for every dollar that the rest of the field gets. And so that gap has to be closed in order for them to be able to serve effectively their fast-growing student populations, which, by the way, are primarily low-income students. The majority are on but they also are first-generation college students, and many of them come from immigrant families that don't quite have yet an understanding of how higher education works. So they need a lot of help to do the outreach to those families, those communities. The HSIs do. They need the funding to support students in terms of counseling services and academic support so that they can succeed, not just in getting a high school diploma, but going through college successfully and becoming part of the American labor force that requires more and more higher ed training. And of course, that's the whole idea, that HSIs obviously require adequate support from the federal government to be able to contribute even more than they already are to the enhancement of the American labor force, the strengthening of the American labor force, because the majority of the new workers in America today are Hispanics, new workers that are joining the labor force in our country. Just like in the last decade, from 2010 to 2020, more than half of all the new population added to America was made up of Hispanics. So the future of the country is very clearly moving in that direction. Right. And the investments required to support these very fast-growing underserved populations not only need, but truly deserve immediate action on the part of Congress. So that's what we are here in DC promoting that particular message of increased support for HSIs. And obviously, over the last 30 years, Congress has invested roughly $5 billion in these institutions over the last 30 years. But that's really a very, very minute amount of what they really need to beef up their infrastructure, their capacity academically, the hiring of faculty, the setting up of labs, and all of those things that cost a lot of money. And they don't have it because they don't have endowments and they don't have wealthy donors to help them with that. So this is a very important public interest, national interest question that the U.S. Congress needs to address as quickly as possible. And of course, we are reminded too that these institutions not only are educating the majority of Latinos and other underserved populations, but they really are becoming the backbone of that labor force that we need for the new economy, for the educated labor force. And that's a costly proposition because they, again, all of those fields of study and under STEM are expensive to set up in terms of labs, faculty, infrastructure in general. And we really need them as quickly as we can.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to you and I was thinking about, you sort of hit on something that I wasn't aware of completely, if you will. The number of HSIs, definitely has grown, practically yearly since the inception, though you guys have had a slight dip in number of institutions, I guess, in the past couple of years. But with that rise in the number of institutions over the years, what I've heard you say was it was not correlated in the rise in the money you guys were getting from the federal government. So as these institutions are actually, I mean, as more institutions are being designated and more Latino students are in the higher ed pipeline, the costs from the government is actually going down. Would that be correct?
That is correct. And so that is totally counterproductive to the interests of America, not to invest in these institutions, which, by the way, even though they are so under-resourced, there was a study done in recent years by Opportunity Insights, a nonprofit organization in higher ed that does socioeconomic studies, and they did one on how higher education institutions in the nation help those at the bottom when they come as freshmen to their campuses at the bottom quintile. How do they do after they finish their degrees vis-a-vis earnings by graduates? Mm-hmm. And they have found that of the top 10 and moving up, those at the bottom to the top in earnings after graduation, out of the top 10, 9 are HSIs.
Right.
So to me, that's almost incredible that these institutions, being so under-resourced, still perform so well. So that whatever minimum investments are made in them pay off enormously for society, because basically these graduates become not only very productive professionals, technicians, workers in the labor force that we need for the technology-driven economy, they also become better, because they're better earnings, better taxpayers. And Absolutely. They also become much more engaged citizens in every way. So it's a win-win for America to educate at even much higher rates of success this population. There was another study done by Georgetown University a couple of years ago on return on investment, mm-hmm. and the degree that you earn, how much you spend and how much you end up earning after graduation, to come up with the return on investment index. And they found that of the top 20 institutions in the nation, 13 are HSIs, mm-hmm. or emerging, and 5 of them were emerging HSIs. So that again is another point, or another data point of corroboration of the tremendous success that these institutions afford to those who need the most help, the most underserved. And so any investment that Congress would make in these institutions would be an enormous return on investment for society. And so that's why we would like to see in the next 30 years, not the rate of investment that has happened over the last 30, but many times over that, so that we can not only catch up with the rest of higher education, but even excel beyond that in terms of federal investments.
Yeah. Thinking about the students got me thinking about the pipeline. And last night, there's a Congresswoman, Jennifer Gonzalez Colon from Puerto Rico, was talking, and she was talking about, I guess, 2 big barriers she saw for Latinx students in America as far as higher ed. Was a lot of them are first generation, and a lot of them had financial difficulty. So that was like, some of the biggest barriers for them getting, into higher ed. And so it makes me think about community colleges. And I know a number of HSIs are community colleges. Do you feel that community colleges should be free?
Well, I think the less expense any student can incur for going to college, but especially low-income students, mm-hmm. The better. Now, to make it free across the board, it may not be a good public policy, because there could be many who don't need it, mm-hmm. whose families are able to pay because they are well off, And so to treat everyone equally in that sense would not be a good policy, because actually you could, people in need should not be precluded from going to college and could get it entirely free, should get it entirely free. And not just community college. I think the whole continuum up to PhD, but there has to be a means test so that only those who really need it get it, that type of support. Otherwise, if we start just saying millionaires can also get the same deal, well, that would not be a good policy for the country. But to your question, I would say yes, everyone who needs or who has any financial constraint should not be precluded from going to college, and community college and the rest should be free for them. And not free in the sense that they would not have to do something to earn it. They would have to perform well academically, and they would have to be good citizens and good workers, etc. There has to be some way of helping them, not just to get through college, but once they are out of college, to stay on course, so that the generational effect of their improvement as graduates of colleges can also be felt by those coming behind them, their own children, their grandchildren, and so forth. So I believe strongly also in public service and community service. And therefore, I would hope that there could be some opportunity for students who get a completely free higher education to do some community service, particularly in the field of the study they are in communities in need. So that is free in the sense of not having to worry about paying or borrowing money to pay or anything like that, but that there is some sense of not entirely just getting, in quote, a free ride, but you do something beyond the ordinary to earn it, and that I don't see why there would be a problem for young people. On the contrary, I see it as a complement to their overall education, is to develop in them that sense of public service, of helping others, helping themselves. But in terms of the finances, absolutely, that would be the way to go. Eliminate that barrier completely for those in need, and make it accessible to everyone, regardless of income. But someone has to pay, and those who have money to pay will need to do so. And so that's how I think about that particular question of free education.
So, I mean, when I think about that, listening to what you were just talking about, earn that free college, whether it be need-based or doing some community service and things like that, keeping up your grades, et cetera, to get it. Not that it's just a straight handout. And so that makes me think about, I know one of the things that you guys talked about last night, and I think that everybody's been talking about nationally, is this recent loan forgiveness program initiated by the Biden administration, which seems to be, unless at least on from what I understand, anybody gets it regardless of, I shouldn't say anybody gets it, I mean, there are certain thresholds, but it doesn't look at it from a need basis. But what do you think about the loan forgiveness program, and what will be the impact, you think, in the Latino community?
Well, according to studies done by some organizations, more than half of all the Latinos who had loan debt, student loan debt, erased it with this particular move by the current administration. So for the Latino community, of course, this is a big deal. This is a great way of helping them not to worry about having to pay those amounts of money. But historically, Latinos have borrowed lower rates than other populations. because they have chosen to work while they're going to college more hours than the average student, which in my view is the wrong thing to do, because you detract your energy and effort from your main sort of goal, which is to get a college degree, by not concentrating on your studies and having to work more hours than you should. And so that delays the graduation, and also, again, maybe affects the quality of your studies. So, but in general, I think it has been a great move. The threshold that they set for all students is not to be earning more than $125,000 a year, which puts it in the middle class range, and that is fine. Obviously, when you think about that, not very many Latinos are earning that kind of money. So, in fact, they double the amount from 10,000 to 20,000 when they are Pell Grant recipients, or were Pell Grant recipients, which is a measure of need, of low incomeness. And to that extent, when they double the amount from 10 to 20,000 for those who were on Pell Grant, it shows that they are in fact paying attention to need, and the neediest get the most forgiven. So I think it's a great move. Obviously, if we think about the main question embedded in all of that is, how can you avoid repeating this thing 5-10 years out?
Right.
That, and to me, that goes back to the beginning of this evolution of moving from viewing higher education attainment as a common good, as a social benefit, to viewing it as a personal privilege, and then deciding that if you are the one who's getting the degree, then you are going to pay for it regardless. And to me, that was a move that came about during the Reagan years, when he came to this town as president, and he started to move away from adequately funding Pell Grants and creating loan programs. And of course, many governors follow his lead and did the same at the state level, reducing budgets for public universities and telling them, oh, but you are free to increase tuition and create any fees you think will help you make up for what we're not going to give you. So they are pushing and more the financial responsibility to students and families, with the consequences that we see today. So there has to be a reassessment of all of that at the state level as well, because really most of the money for institutional support comes from the states for public university, which is where most of the students go. 80% of our students or more attend public universities. So public colleges, universities, I should say, because there I include community colleges. And yet a lot of governments at the state level are not yet on board with that. I see California trying to move back to more investments from the state side, but I see other states that are not doing it. And so that is going to create, I think, on a geographic sense, disparities depending on where you live, because if some states invest more and reduce the cost for families, obviously the ones who don't will just simply continue to perpetrate this problem for the years to come. And so I think we need to think about those questions of state funding, and of course increasing the Pell Grant more significantly than we have done to date, so that the needier students can avoid borrowing money to make ends meet. So that to me is really a question that is not being addressed yet, but it has to be. Otherwise, 10 years out, we're going to have the same problem again.
No, you're absolutely right. I never really thought about it that way. I mean, it's maybe subconsciously, but yeah, to sort of now bring it to the forefront and actually talk about it, that this is just a snapshot of where we are. And if nothing changes, an administration 10 years down the road may be doing the same thing for the next, cadre of students that have come through. So very good point and good ideas in regards to where some of the change needs to take place. I think a lot last night, I keep going back to last night, that, Senator Padilla was talking about. I think Melanie Gonzalez talked about it. I think I heard you talk about it, but a lot of folks talked about equity. We talked about, over the years, affirmative action and now DEI, but now, I think there's a lot on the table in regards to equity. And so wanted to get your take on what does equity mean for HSIs? Where does it need to be?
Well, in terms of public support, of course, equity means financial investments in their capacity building so that they can improve programs and create new ones that are needed by our society, our economy. And that, of course, is our central issue with respect to equity in terms of HSIs. As far as higher education in general, of course, we want to see not the diminishment, I should say, of any cohort of institutions that are getting the lion's share of money for research or other purposes in higher ed, but we want them to share some of that by engaging HSIs, in this case, in ways that will allow students to move up to those more endowed institutions and to get the PhDs and to get the graduate degrees and to get the engineering degrees, the science degrees, and so forth, that they are not getting now. But they have to do it in a very intentional and systematic way by creating consortia with HSIs and allowing for more upward mobility of students to those more endowed institutions. And that will help the institutions themselves and the institutions, the HSIs, because the HSIs stand to strengthen their overall academic capacity by collaborating with the more developed, more endowed, research-intensive universities. And so I see, on the one hand, the funding part that Congress needs to address in a much more equitable way for HSIs. But I also see the interinstitutional opportunity for those institutions that are much more capable and financially and academically to work with those that are less so, and bringing them up and making them part of the process of getting many more of those who are underrepresented, those at the top end, but coming up from the HSIs and other institutions that are given a chance to those many young people. So I see the interinstitutional opportunity for greater equity by those that are more endowed, working together in a much more significant way with the lesser endowed institutions, among them many HSIs, because they will help them to diversify their own ranks, both in terms of getting more underrepresented students to get PhDs so that they can become part of the faculty and top level administration jobs, but they also can obviously increase their own student diversity at the top end of the higher education food chain, so to speak. And so I see that other aspect of how interinstitutionally we can make a significant difference equity-wise. And of course, the state level is so important that we concentrate more of our attention in states where we have large numbers of HSIs. We have, obviously, California is the largest, followed by Texas, and New York, Florida, Illinois, others, and Arizona, etc. And we have to really work in a much more systematic way with those state legislatures and governors, because in some of those states, they are going totally in the wrong direction when it comes to equity issues. And they are exacerbating the inequities that already exist. And so, again, and then the other part of the question seems to me is the private sector. I don't think we can forget that the private sector has to be part of the solution, because at the end of the day, it is the private sector that benefits most from the graduates that come out of our universities and become employees of those corporations. And they need to invest much more of their resources in the institutions that are producing those quality professionals, technicians, engineers, workers for those corporations. We need to find a more effective way of engaging the private sector as well, to bring about equity, because obviously by investing in a much more intentional way in HSIs, they stand to increase the representation of Latinos in their own workforce, particularly at the top end, where we have so few who are executives, who are managers, who are members of boards of those corporations and so forth. So we have great opportunity to really change the landscape of inequity for Latinos and other populations who historically have been just absent in many cases from decision-making positions.
Right. This is actually a good segue. When you talk about corporations getting involved, obviously K-12, I mean, everybody plays a role, obviously. So, but earlier this year, Senator Padilla from California and Congressman Castro of Texas introduced bipartisan and bicameral legislation known as the HERE Act. And for those unaware, HERE stands for the Hispanic Educational Resource and Empowerment Act. So what does this legislation hope to achieve, and why is it so important?
It's very important because what is trying to promote, and eventually, if it passes, will really be a transformational change. It compel and support higher education institutions, in this case HSIs, to work in a much more meaningful and effective way with K-12. In other words, to really eliminate that artificial divorce between K-12 and higher ed that it persists in our society, that there should be a continuum all the way up. And to do that, obviously, they need to interlock their resources and their expertise in more significant ways that they've been doing it. For example, many of the high schools in what we would call Hispanic-Serving School Districts, which are the feeder K-12 schools for HSIs, lack labs and highly qualified faculty to teach advanced placement courses, for example, to teach the advanced math, the advanced science, and so forth. And our HSIs have the opportunity to work with them and provide visiting professors to those high schools for subjects where they lack quality faculty. And they can, and the K-12 districts are lower income districts who cannot compete to get the more qualified faculty with the more affluent districts. And so going back to the point of equity, it's a structurally set up to happen. We know that. And so at least in a functional way, we need to do what we can to mitigate all of that. And one way is to create those much more meaningful substantive connections between HSIs and Hispanic-Serving School Districts, districts that really have very diverse student populations in the country. And the idea is obviously, number one, that those students finishing high school in those school districts will come out much better prepared to undertake college level courses. They will reduce the need for remedial courses at colleges and universities and save all that money to be put into preventive measures. And the rate of success in terms of graduation and entrance to graduation from high school and entrance to college will just explode. And the success in getting through college will also increase significantly because the students will be better prepared. And so it's a win-win. And at the end of the day, you will have even better prepared professionals and graduates of those colleges and universities that, again, our workforce needs so badly. And so that's what this HERE Act is intended to do, is to create those bridges of opportunity and collaboration between HSIs and K-12 schools to achieve greater student success all the way up to entering the labor force.
Understood. When you were talking about that, you talked about interlocking resources, and I get that from K-12 to higher ed, but you also talked about how diverse a lot of HSIs are. So what do you guys do at HACU in regards to, interlocking resources with other groups on these campuses, such when you look at the diversity of looking at, because you talked earlier about the numbers, of working with the HBCUs or the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or what is it, APAHE? I think it's the Asian Pacific American Higher Education, or AAHEC, those groups that are also, in some regards on the same campuses as
exactly.
Others.
No, we work with them very closely, particularly on policy issues. And we have obviously achieved a great deal together. For example, in the Title III, there was a program created years ago for STEM education for all minority-serving institutions that we work together to get passed, and now has become a permanently funded, obligated program by Congress indefinitely. So that to me is a great example of collaboration and success among different groups of institutions. And they are, the HSIs get a portion of that money, HBCUs get another chunk, and so forth. Everyone gets something, and we all work together to make it happen. And so the students are benefiting from all of that. And so we obviously can do a lot more than that. And we actually, when we first drafted, because HACU really was the driver of the HERE Act in terms of helping put together the bill, we actually invited other groups to join in and really not call it Hispanic empowerment, Hispanic education and empowerment, whatever is resources and empowerment act. But we were calling it, I think at the beginning, higher education. It was a different name, but to be inclusive of all these other groups and say, and we are in the language that we will use throughout the text of the bill will reflect the inclusion of everyone. But I don't know, they probably didn't quite understand the importance of doing it together. They did not join us, and so we had to go back and redo the bill and put it as a Hispanic, because we want it done. Now, the great thing about it is that because HSIs are so diverse, by definition, we will be helping everyone on that campus. And I think we have more than double the number of Black African American students at HSIs than all the HBCUs put together. Same thing for tribal colleges and universities. 42% of all the Asian Americans in college today attend an HSI, and so forth. So by definition, those HSIs already have tremendous diversity, and their overall institutional improvement will help everyone. Okay, so, and in fact, it's interesting that you asked that, because looking at K-12 is the same thing. Those districts that have a lot of Latino students, what we would consider Hispanic-Serving Institutions, also have a lot of African Americans and so forth and so on. So we really are talking about very diverse student populations on both sides, K-12 and higher ed. And certainly we would welcome any participation from the other groups, and actually amend the bill as needed to fit that, to reflect that inclusion that we would like to have. But again, and then in some instances, you might know, HBCUs are becoming also HSIs. Yeah, and where I live in San Antonio, Texas, one of the largest HBCUs, St. Philip's College, for example, about 11,000 students. Almost 2/3 of them are Latino. And obviously about 15-20% are African American, and then others. But we respect their identity as an HBCU. We embrace it. And obviously, at the same time, we have them as part of our association because they are an HSI. And so they participate in what we do, but at the same time they remain we embrace that again, an HBCU, and others will become HSIs too over time, because in places like Houston and other parts of Texas, and even in Georgia and other places, we're beginning to see the growth of Latino. So they are becoming HSIs, but at the same time, some of them are HBCUs. So actually, without even having any sort of external players involved, by having some of those institutions in the community of HSIs, they add value. They add a lot of a different perspective on how we have to think about HSIs going forward. But we certainly would hope that we will be more successful in engaging the organizations that represent other minority-serving institutions going forward.
No, you're right about what's what I'm looking for. HBCUs growing in Latino numbers. I definitely was familiar with St. Philip's. But yeah, I mean, just sort of anecdotally, I moved my nephew into North Carolina A&T, which is an HBCU in North Carolina. And I was surprised at how diverse it was, really from the standpoint of the number of not just obviously African-American students, but the number of Hispanic and white students that right there. So, it's just a melting pot. So this all, it's just going to evolve over the years. Right. And I appreciate you bringing some perspective and clarity for me in regards to the HERE Act, because at a high level, I got it. I mean, I see, what's in the bill and what's needed there. But in the back of my mind, I was like, this would really benefit, all the other underrepresented groups. So it's good to know that you guys tried to bring everybody, or they tried to bring everybody to the table, and there still is opportunity. But I said, I thought exactly what you said. At the end of the day, if this passes, those resources will still help, everybody at these institutions.
Absolutely.
So, Gosh, we're getting close to the end of time here. I guess still got so many more things I wanted to ask you about, but I would be remiss, and I'll just skip a lot of stuff that I did want to talk about. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 one day. But I do want to talk about, I guess, the other entity that you guys talked a lot about yesterday and we're commemorating, which was the 30th anniversary of HNIP. And I think I just have always known that name, just to make sure I'm saying it right. This is for, what is it? The Hispanic National Internship Program? Is that what it stands for?
No, it stands for HACU National Internship Program.
Oh, HACU National. Okay, gotcha. All right. So, love the program. You know, I have, you know, have seen and heard about it over the years, but it was really good to get some perspective on it. And, you know, I think it was great. You guys honored last night, it was a lady named Casanova. I can't recall.
Yeah, the lady who first helped us get it going, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia Casanova.
Alicia.
Yeah. She was with she was a political appointee actually with the George Bush the first administration in transportation, and she was the one who promoted that and got the funding for the first cohort in 92. And of course, the program has boomed over the years, except that we still are struggling with creating more slots for the many, many thousands of applicants that we get, because we only place in a good year, maybe 500 throughout the 3 sections that we have. Mm-hmm. Mostly in the summer, about half of them in the summer, and the other half divided between fall and spring semesters. And obviously, the program has demonstrated its value beyond any doubt from anyone. On the contrary, everybody knows that the program is extremely successful in a number of ways. Number one, of course, giving a chance to students from colleges across the country who never thought of themselves as potential public servants or employees of federal agencies to experience professional level work, and as they go through college, and then think about new possibilities for their careers as they do so. And eventually, a lot of them end up coming back after graduation to be part of government. And it's something that is needed so badly as well, because you might know that Hispanics only represent about 9% of the federal labor force. And obviously, we are almost 20% of the US population now. So there's a huge gap there. And in some agencies, it's worse than that, of course. But the program is a very good and cost-effective way of bringing some of the best and brightest from our college universities to experience work in the federal government and hopefully help close those gaps that we have. And so, but again, like everything that we do, is not just Hispanics. And that program, yeah, the majority probably are Hispanic every year, but we have a lot of African Americans, we have Native Americans, we have Asian Americans, we have white students who attend our institutions. So we have, it's also a microcosm of our institutions, student diversity. And so every program that we do, you will probably find a similar kind of profile in terms of participation rates. So the program also has proven its value for the institutions themselves, because by having some of their students and eventually graduates exposed and become part of the federal labor force, they basically are placing ambassadors for their own institutions going forward. And they also become mentors for those who are still in college and so forth. So it has a generational impact, both and the student on the student side, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, on the family side, because their younger siblings or friends or people in the community, young people, will see that there's a possibility of that I could become someone like an SES and government, or a leader even in the corporate community, or whatever the case may be. But that's a generational effect that is so valuable, because most of these families are low income in terms of their socioeconomic status, first generation, the college students that coming out of those families. And in many cases, they are immigrants who still don't even have a clear sense of how the higher ed system works and how people can advance in their careers, because they didn't experience it. I mean, I was really incredibly moved by what Mr. Padilla shared. His parents having come from Mexico with very little education.
Yeah.
And he is a senator, a U.S. senator now. And that's only because of the education that he got, the higher education. And then at the very end, we had Mr. Vargas, Congressman Vargas.
Exactly.
I mean, to me, it was such just incredibly uplifting story that his parents both illiterate, and the 10 children that they had coming from Mexico all became college graduates.
Yes. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, Senator Padilla and Congressman Vargas, both their stories were just, it's just amazing, that first generation kids are in Congress,
And so, but it's the power of higher education and experiencing people and places that are not part of your familiar environment, and that will allow you to open your eyes to new possibilities and make the most out of them. And this is what the program does, essentially. And so we're very, very proud of the more than 14,000 alumni that have come through the program over the years. And it's amazing that I was attending a luncheon here in town the other day for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. And when I got to the registration, the young guy who was taking care of me said, Dr. Flores, how you doing? And I didn't know who he was. Says, I was an intern with HACU, and now I work here in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. And the young woman who was right next to him doing the same thing, she said, oh, I was too. And I went into the luncheon, and a lot of them would come up and say hi. And I obviously didn't know them, but they knew about me. And it would share immediately, I was a HACU intern with so-and-so, and I work now and so. And to me, it was more like, okay, this is more like a HACU conference here. With all of And
no, I mean, it's
And to me, that is really one of the most motivational things that one can have working in organizations like this, to see young people achieve their dreams of a higher education, and then some in terms of their careers. And that has absolutely no, you cannot put any price on that as far as we are concerned, those who work with HACU like me, because we experience that level of satisfaction every single day.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, as I was coming back to the hotel from a short walk that I had this morning, a young lady from Alabama A&M, African American. I met her actually yesterday at because she works for USDA.
Okay.
And she came through our program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't recall what her last name is, Sylvia. And she was just, just very grateful that she had the chance to come through the program. And she said it hadn't been because HNEP recruited me for an internship and she did 2 sessions
Mm-hmm.
that I would not be where I am. And now she's a manager
Right.
with the USDA. And of course, she's one of our champions there, looking
Mm-hmm.
for ways of helping those who are still in college move up.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
No, I mean that. So we only had a few minutes to talk about it, but I definitely encourage our audience to, go on the HACU website, find out more about HNIP. The young lady that gave her testimony last night, being in the internship program, and now she's in a position to help other students that are coming along.
Right.
It's very, very inspirational. I mean, obviously, we talked about Padilla and Vargas. Not everybody, black, white, or yellow, will become a senator or a congressman. I mean, there's only what 465 of those jobs. So, but they made it. But she really showed how you could be an example. To, like you said, friends, family, cousins, and an inspiration, and how she's reaching back to help. So,
Right.
So congratulations on the 30 years of HNIP. Hopefully, I was dismayed when you gave the numbers of like 6,000 applicants, but only 500 get slots. So, that's 5-6 of people who applied who, don't have an internship with the government.
Exactly.
And so much more opportunity. So hopefully that'll grow. But we're at the end of our time. So Dr. Flores, I truly appreciate you taking the time to spend with us on In the Margins. And I know our team of folks will see you guys at the HACU National Meeting in a few weeks. And if you have any closing words, I'll give you the floor.
No, just want to thank you for your interest in what we do, and for your words of support for what we do. And of course, your publication is one of those that is really helping society better understand the importance of higher education for all, and the importance of opportunity for everyone in this nation, and not just for the few. And we are very fortunate to have your publication connected to what we do. Thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on the 30th anniversary of the legislation that created HSIs, and the 30th anniversary also of our flagship program in student services known as HNIP, the HACU National Internship Program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great day.